We find ourselves here today in the Garden of Gethsemane. I've come to this place that's called in Italian the Rometaggio. That simply means a place of hermitage, a place of prayer and retreat. And one of the things they have right here, this is the actual Garden of Gethsemane, where they would press the olives. Gethsemane means an olive press. They've placed this bronze statue of Jesus. Here he is in prayer, his eyes turned up, looking to the Father. He is prostrate over these rocks. And so I wanted to bring you here with me on this Holy Thursday, because we have finished our 10 Commandments and we're making our way through this Holy Triduum to the promised land of the resurrection. This is how we cross through that river, cross through the Red Sea on the night of Easter Vigil. Freedom and trusting abandonment is what Jesus won for us in this garden, and what I think this bronze statue actually shows us. Now, Vicki Burbach, she's a Catholic blogger, writer. She has a number of things that she's published. She has an article written about surrendering ourselves to freedom. And when she begins this article, she talks about her experience as a swimming coach. And for all of us who learned how to swim, we remember what it was like, and she describes it perfectly when she's working with children. You know, you get into the pool and you're frightened to death. You're hanging onto the edge of the pool, white-knuckled, afraid if you can't touch with your feet, yet so desirous to be able to be free to cross the swimming pool with your arms and your legs moving. And there's a process to be able to achieve that freedom. And she writes that there's a turning point where a student can make considerable progress. She says it's the moment precisely when the students realize that they could get along much better in the water by surrendering their control. And that's because one of the first things she teaches them to do, of course, is to float on their backs. And if you remember in your own experience learning to swim, you always want to raise your neck and you start to flail your arms. And the more you do that, the more you want to take control. You just can't float and you sink, and then there's panic that comes around you, and you lose all of that freedom that you gain when you just learn to relax and to float and let what's around you carry you. And of course, when you're teaching someone to swim, that hand underneath their back that's holding them up gives you security and strength. And this gives you a way to trust in this abandonment. And it speaks a lot about our own spiritual life, and really our continuing work of freedom. We want to control everything versus just floating. So sometimes we can be frustrated by our inability to make progress in the spiritual life. We can struggle like these new swimmers, and this is what Vicki is talking about in her article. And this is especially true when we think that our environment is out of our control. Let's go back here to Holy Thursday. They've come from just over there. I can see where, Mount Zion right there. They would have crossed the Kidron Valley and come here to pray. Everything seemed to be under control, but it became out of control. In the prayer, he realizes he's going to be put to death. His apostles are asleep. They leave him abandoned. Everything is out of control. But he abandons himself to the Father. We can strain to stretch our legs and control things. You think about Peter in this garden, who had this sword when they come in, Judas with the soldiers, and he cuts off the ear. He wants to control those circumstances. He's flailing around. And when we do that, we sink. When this happens, Jesus has to tell Peter, put your sword in its scabbard. If you work by violence you will die. It's that same lesson he taught to Moses when he tried to free his people by slaying the Egyptian. So we can only find everything when we are searching. We can only find what we are searching for when we surrender our control to the Heavenly Father. When we see the statue, when we look into the eyes of Christ in prayer, that's exactly what he was doing. It's a mistake to believe that salvation is dependent on human endeavors. And only if we are determined enough, disciplined enough, focused enough, holy enough, can we earn our way to heaven, into the promised land. Again and again, the Lord was teaching Moses and the chosen people through the desert. Abandon yourself. Here Jesus taught his apostles and is teaching us even today. If you want true freedom, abandon yourself to the Father. placing ourselves and our faith in human nature and our capacity to control our environment, our desires, our actions, and our thoughts, we will sink. What we have to do is to cooperate with God's grace. And this garden under this beautiful sky is where grace began to come down at the beginning of this Holy Triduum. It's not about our power to save ourselves, but it's about His power to save us. So that's the first lesson I think we can draw from Gethsemane. But how do we do that? How do we surrender ourselves? How can we be vulnerable? We have to become vulnerable if we are going to live in His providence. So what's the definition of surrender? The image is what we see right here. A definition could be it's about accepting what comes rather than perfectly juggling all of the balls that are in our spiritual, physical, familiar, and community obligations. Surrender is trusting in the Father, trusting in God. He's the one that has everything under control, rather than trying to juggle everything ourselves. He knows how to do this. As we know, because He told us this, He showed us this in the Garden of Gethsemane, letting go and surrendering can be very hard, so much so that He sweat blood, because He was facing death. So what is it that is the motivation? How was He open to the Father, and how was He able to let go? His great motivation here, and our great motivation, the motivation of the chosen people, Moses learned this motivation. It's love. On Holy Thursday here in the church at Gethsemane, the Church of Prayer is what it traditionally was called, back at the very early times, even in the times of Egeria, the Church of Prayer. They sprinkle rose petals on the rock of Jesus' passion. Roses are your typical sign and symbol of love. If we want to surrender, our motivation is love. He came here out of immense love for me and immense love for you. Immense love for every single person that has ever lived throughout the course of history. When you think about, well, for those of you who are parents, if you think about a child, everything you do for them, surrender for them, you do it because you love them. When you're in love with somebody, you don't count the cost. You give and you surrender. That's our motivation. That's His motivation. And that's how we become free. It causes us to sacrifice as a gift without even thinking twice. He came here out of love. And when we think about our true freedom, our true promised land, of course we know is the heavenly Jerusalem. But our freedom, as we've been talking about over these last 40 days, more than 40 days, is freedom from sin. Sin in itself is the opposite of love. In fact, it's selfishness that binds us and traps us and makes us slaves. And it's the power of the Paschal mystery that begins right here, where Christ has set us free because of love. Through perfect obedience on the cross, perfect obedience through the glory of His resurrection, which is the pathway we're taking, the Lamb of God has taken away the sins of the world, like we repeat in every single Mass. By means of our service and our love, also by our offering up of our trials and sufferings, all of these things around us that we cannot control, even though we really want to, we share in the one redeeming sacrifice of Christ, completing in ourselves what is lacking in the suffering of Christ, which is St. Paul in Colossians 1. This is true freedom. This is true abandonment. And this is how we can do it. And this is what Gethsemane teaches us. So Jesus' prayer here is freedom through trusting abandonment in the Father's will out of love for us, bringing us into the promised land. You know, I think I've mentioned this before, but the promised land, as I just said, it's the heavenly Jerusalem. That's why it's so significant to be sitting right here and seeing Jerusalem right in front of us. The old city, what Jesus Himself saw when He was praying right here. So if we go back to the gospel passage of when He came here with His apostles, like I said, from over there when they were celebrating the Last Supper, if you go to Mark 14, He actually says this: when they had sung a hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives after the Last Supper. Now, this hymn is probably an allusion to the Hallel Psalms. And the Hallel actually means thanksgiving psalms. Thanks is being given to God for the liberation of the people, the chosen people from slavery. That's what those psalms are for. That's what he sang before coming over here. And it's thanksgiving for his help, for God's help, which is asked for anew, facing difficulties and threats in the present. He was looking at the difficulty and threat of death. We can never forget every single year in the Holy Triduum that the greatest result of sin, the greatest slavery, is death. And he came here to wrestle with death and set us free from death, accepting his own death. And he's giving thanks to God not only for liberation and the freedom the people won in the time of Moses, but he is praying in this time of difficulty and threats in the present to free us. Look at those psalms of the Hallel Psalms, and that is something that we can pray again and again. So the walk to Gethsemane is punctuated by Jesus' remarks that convey a sense of impending death and proclaim the imminent dispersion of his disciples. They need to be set free again. They need to be brought back together. Now, Mark the Evangelist continues in his account of when Jesus comes here. If you go to Mark 14, verses 33 and 34, he actually says, "My soul is very sorrowful, even to death. Remain here and watch." This is what we're doing right now. But that particular phrase is actually bringing us back to another psalm. It's Psalm 43. It's the firm determination unto death that calls to mind a situation lived by many of those sent by God in the Old Testament, and which is expressed in their prayers. That's when they prayed Psalm 43. Following the mission entrusted to them frequently means encountering hostility, rejection, and persecution. Of course he's praying that psalm right here. He's inviting us to pray that psalm every day, and especially in moments when there's suffering and persecution. It's a psalm that brings us grace to liberation. But it also brings us back to Moses. Let's not forget that Moses was dramatically aware of his trial, everything that he lived while guiding the people who complained against him constantly in the desert. And he says to God, if you remember, and this is in Numbers 11, "I am not able to carry all this people alone. The burden is too heavy for me. If you will deal thus with me, Lord, rather kill me at once. Kill me if I have found favor in your sight, that I might not see my wretchedness anymore." He was desperate. He was in a time of difficulty. The psalm also brings us back to Elijah, the other saint who has followed us and journeyed with us during this pilgrimage, one who was right there on the Mount Sinai. He finds his way difficult and his duty to God and to the people difficult. Going back to that book of Kings, he says, he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness, and he came and sat under that broom tree we talked about before, and he asked that he might die, saying, "It's enough. Now, O Lord, take my life, for I am no better than my fathers." This is an echoing or even a foreshadowing of this very prayer that Jesus is saying right here. "If it be your will, take this cup away from me. I am sorrowful unto death." That's what Jesus is saying. This is why he wants us to be near him during this Holy Thursday, during this hour where he is facing such trial and difficulty. So Mark also tells us, like we can see in the sculpture, that he prostrates himself on the ground. He falls on his face. Now, during this Holy Triduum, this is tomorrow when you go to the service on Good Friday, you'll see this. It starts in silence. The priests come in and they prostrate themselves completely before the altar. It's a time of silence. It's a time of the Passion. They're imitating this gesture of Jesus right here in the Garden of Gethsemane. And it's a gesture of pleading for freedom. So as Mark the Evangelist tells us in chapter 14, verse 35, it says, "Going a little further, Jesus fell to the ground and prayed. that if it were possible, this hour might pass from him. He fell face down to the ground. If you think about kings of old, it's like falling down and saying, okay, I completely submit myself to you, completely. This gesture is one of complete abandonment, trust, and obedience. Abandonment to the Father. Unique prayer. He is one with the Father. And he says, I trust you. I will take this on. I love you. I love them. And so, it's not just on Good Friday when we see this position. If you've ever seen the ordination of a priest, it's the same thing. If you've seen a monk or a monastic sister enter into the monastery, it's the same gesture of this complete and total obedience in trust. In trust. And Jesus asked the Father if it would be possible, like we said, to obtain that this hour pass by him. It's not only man's fear and anguish in the face of death, but it's the devastation of the Son of God who perceives the terrible mass of evil that he must take upon himself. This is what is pushing him down to abandon himself to the Father. So in this sense, actually Pope Benedict XVI, in an excellent audience he gave in 2012, on a Wednesday audience, he spoke about the prayer here in Gethsemane. And he invites us to pray like Jesus did. It's a very common act of, or position of prayer in the Eastern Church to, just prostrate yourself before the Lord in abandonment and in trust. And if you ask a monastic sister or a monk who's entering a monastery, why did you enter? Remember what Father Justin said to us? To save my soul, to be free, to enter into freedom. And so every Christian, each one of us, needs to come before God and pray. Lay before him our labors, the suffering of certain situations, of certain days. Give our daily commitment to follow him as a Christian. And also put before him the weight of evil that we carry on ourselves, that we see within ourselves and around us. Those things that bind us and keep us enslaved. So Mark continues with the last part of his gospel in verse 36, saying, Abba, Father, all things are possible to you. Remove this cup from me, yet not my will, but your will be done. Calling him the most intimate name, Abba. This brings us back again to the covenant, this relationship. Everything that we've been living in the Ten Commandments is to bring us into this relationship that he shows us in this garden, calling his Father Abba, inviting us to call him Abba. And then he says, but not my will, but your will be done. There was a great saint who was actually an incredible martyr. If you want to read about him, Saint Maximus the Confessor. He actually got involved in a whole controversy because, there were all of these controversies at the beginning of the church. Did he have one will? Did he have two wills? Did he have a human will and a divine will, or just a divine will? And it became very clear when you reflect and pray on everything that Jesus taught with his life. And, the first Christians, he had two wills. He had a human will and a divine will. This is one of the places they can see that. Not my will, your will be done. And he's giving us the key to true freedom. I can have a will. I can want to control. I can be like struggling in the water instead of swimming and letting myself be abandoned to God. He's saying, let go of your will. He let go of his human will, or actually he unified it with his Father, with his Abba, because he trusted him. That is true trusting abandonment. And that is when we are truly free and we can, using the analogy at the beginning, swim across the pool with great ease. And it's like we're flying. And that's what we've said many times. Freedom is like flying. It says, if you remember when we were in the desert, we went back to that very well-known song which quotes the Old Testament. You have taken me as an eagle. You have lifted me up. You've lifted me up like eagle's wings, made me fly as on the breath of dawn. And this is what freedom really is. This is what it means when we abandon ourselves to him. And so Maximus the Confessor paid with his life for this. They cut off his hands. They cut out his tongue because he affirmed this truth. And that brings us to something we can pray every day. And this is the application maybe that I would like to invite you to do in this Holy Triduum. The Our Father. Abba, the Our Father. Your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Uniting ourselves to him, entrusting, abandonment. All of my circumstances, all of my situations, all of my slavery to sin, the mess inside, the mess around me, let's abandon ourselves to Him. So from this beautiful place in Gethsemane, uniting ourselves with the Lord's Prayer, know that we are also praying for each and every one of you as we begin this Triduum on this Holy Thursday and walk this way, the way of the cross, into the grave, and to the resurrection. God bless you.